A mute waitress saw the poison in the Don's glass that his own men missed. She couldn't speak, couldn't scream. So she wrote 3 words on a napkin and slid it toward him. When he read it, his face went white and he called every soldier he had. Her name was Anna. She worked the quiet late shift at Il Destino, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where Don Massimo Romano held his private meetings. That night, she was pouring a $2,000 Barolo when she saw the faint, oily shimmer at the rim of his glass. The question wasn't who would poison a king. It was who in his own inner circle had already done it. Anna's silence was her armor. Born deaf, she'd learned to read the world in micro-expressions and minute gestures, a skill that made her the perfect observer in a room full of men who lied for a living. Il Destino was more than a restaurant. It was Don Massimo Romano's private court. The back booth, shrouded in velvet shadows, was his throne. That night his inner circle was assembled. To his right, Silvio, his consigliere for 20 years, a man with the calm eyes of a priest and the dry, precise hands of an accountant. To his left, his nephew and underboss, Marco, all restless energy and sharp, expensive tailoring. The air hummed with a tension no ordinary patron would notice. Anna moved through the dim light like a ghost, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates. She saw the bottle of Barolo arrive, carried not by the sommelier but by Marco himself. A show of respect or something else. She watched as Marco poured, his thumb positioned high on the bottle's neck, his body blocking the table's view. A practiced move, one she'd seen 100 times. But then a flicker. His pinky finger dipped, just for an instant, toward the rim of Don Massimo's glass as he set it down. The Don raised his glass, the deep red liquid catching the light. That's when Anna saw it, the faint, iridescent rainbow sheen like oil on water clinging to the crystal where Marco's finger had been. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that sign. A year ago, before Il Destino, she'd worked in the kitchen of a pharmaceutical lab cafeteria. She'd seen a researcher spill a concentrated alkaloid. It left that same oily residue before it dissolved, odorless, tasteless, and deadly within minutes. Panic locked her throat, a familiar prison. She couldn't shout. She couldn't whisper a warning. Don Massimo was lifting the glass to his lips, nodding at something Silvio was saying. Anna's hand dove into her apron pocket, finding the stub of a pencil she used for orders. She snatched a clean linen napkin from her service tray. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scrawled 3 jagged words, her handwriting wild with terror. "Do not drink." She glided forward, her waitress smile plastered on her face. As she leaned to adjust the placement of a bread basket, she let the napkin slip from her fingers. It fluttered down, coming to rest just beneath the Don raised wine glass. For a breath that felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Don Massimo continued his toast, the glass inches from his mouth. Then his eyes, sharp and perpetually scanning, dropped. They tracked from the napkin to Anna's retreating figure and back. He slowly lowered the glass, his expression unchanged. He picked up the napkin with 2 fingers as if examining a curious insect. The change was instantaneous. All the color drained from his face, leaving his olive skin a sickly gray. The easy power in his posture vanished, replaced by a wire-tight rigidity. He didn't look at Marco. He didn't look at Silvio. His dark eyes found Anna, who had frozen by the service door. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he moved. He stood so suddenly his chair screeched against the marble floor. The conversation at the table died. "My phone," he said, his voice a low rasp. He pulled his cell from his jacket and hit a speed dial, his gaze never leaving his nephew. "It's me. Lock down the building. No one in or out. Then come to the back room of Il Destino. Bring everyone, now." The word everyone hung in the air. In Romano's world, everyone meant every soldier, every enforcer, every loyal trigger finger in the city. It meant war. Marco's smile was brittle. "Uncle, is everything all right?" Don Massimo finally looked at him, and what Marco saw in his uncle's eyes made his own smile die. "Sit down, Marco." It wasn't a request. As the first black sedative screeched to a halt outside the restaurant, Anna realized the terrible truth. She had stopped a murder, but in doing so, she had stepped directly into the crosshairs. The poisoner was in this room, and now so was she. The restaurant became a locked box. Heavy men in dark suits flooded the dining room, their presence smothering the last whispers of candle-lit elegance. They moved with a terrible efficiency, clearing the other patrons with a politeness that brooked no argument. Within 3 minutes, Il Destino held only Don Massimo, his two captains, Anna, and a dozen stone-faced soldiers. Massimo never raised his voice. He placed the poisoned glass and the napkin in the center of the table like exhibits at a trial. "Silvio," he said, his eyes fixed on Marco, "call Dr. Rix. Have him come here and test this." Silvio, the consigliere, nodded, his face unreadable. He pulled out a phone, his movements calm and deliberate. Marco shifted in his seat, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple despite the cool air. "This is a mistake, Uncle," Marco said, forcing a laugh. "A misunderstanding. The girl is confused, she's simple." Anna felt the word like a slap. She met Marco's gaze and shook her head slowly, once. Then she pointed at the glass, mimed pouring, and deliberately touched her own pinky finger to an imaginary rim. The message was unmistakable. Don Massimo's eyes darkened. "You poured the wine, Marco. No one else touched that bottle until it reached my hand." "And I would die for you," Marco exploded, half rising from his seat. Two soldiers immediately stepped closer. "This is insanity. She's a nobody, a mute waitress planting ideas in your head. How do we know she didn't poison it herself? For attention, for money from the Calabres?" The accusation hung in the air, a toxic cloud. All eyes turned to Anna. In that moment, she was more vulnerable than she had ever been on the streets. She had no voice to defend herself, only the truth in her eyes. She pulled a fresh napkin from her apron and wrote again, her hand steady with a fury that overrode her fear. "I saw your finger. I worked in a lab. I know the residue." She slid the napkin to Don Massimo. He read it, then looked back at Marco, his expression settling into something cold and final. "We will wait for the doctor." The next hour was a silent torture. Dr. Rixay, an elderly man with trembling hands who was clearly on the family's payroll, arrived with a small kit. He tested the wine with a series of chemical swabs. The final one turned a deep, violent purple. He looked up, his face ashen. "Don Massimo, it is aconitine, wolfsbane. A few drops, cardiac arrest within minutes. It would look like a natural heart attack." A deathly silence filled the room. Marco's bravado shattered. It wasn't me. Someone must have tampered with the bottle before I brought it up. Silvio, tell him." Silvio had been watching, a silent statue. Now he spoke, his voice like gravel. "The wine came from your private cellar, Marco. You collected it yourself an hour ago. The security footage will show that." Marco's face crumpled. He looked from his uncle to Silvio, realizing the trap had been sprung long before he walked into the dining room. This wasn't a spontaneous accusation. It was an execution. Don Massimo stood. "Take him to the warehouse. I will speak with him there." As soldiers hauled a screaming Marco away, Massimo turned to Anna. "You will come with me. You are not safe." He didn't ask. He stated a fact. Anna was bundled into the back of a black sedan, seated between two massive bodyguards. They drove not to some ominous warehouse, but to a fortified estate high in the hills. The Romano compound. It was a world of silent fountains, high walls topped with razor wire and men with watchful eyes. Anna was given a room, a beautiful, sterile guest suite with a lock on the inside. A female guard was posted outside her door. She was a prisoner, but a prized one. The next morning, Don Massimo summoned her to his study. The room was lined with books, not for show but for use. He sat behind a vast desk, looking older in the daylight, the lines on his face etched deep with betrayal. "I have checked your story," he said without preamble, sliding a file across the desk. "Anna Giove, 28, orphaned at 12, profoundly deaf from birth. You worked in the kitchen at Ventura Pharmaceuticals for 3 years until the lab was shut down for safety violations. You are exactly who you say you are." Anna nodded, relieved but still tense. She picked up a pen and notepad from the desk. "Why would your nephew want you dead?" Massimo smiled, a thin, bitter curve of his lips. "Power, the oldest story, my brother's son. He is impatient. He has debts, gambling debts to people who are not our friends. The Calibri family promised him my seat in exchange for my death. They provided the poison. My men found the empty vial in his car." It seemed so simple, so clean. A greedy nephew, a rival family, a solved puzzle. But Anna remembered the look in Silvio's eyes at the restaurant. Not shock, not anger, calculation. She wrote again. "And Silvio, he knew about the debts." Massimo's eyes narrowed. "Silvio knows everything. He has been my advisor since I took power. He warned me about Marco's weakness months ago." Then why didn't he stop him? Why let it get to the restaurant? The question hung in the air, a dangerous seed of doubt. Don Massimo did not answer for a long time. He studied Anna as if seeing her for the first time, not as a waitress or a witness, but as a mind. "You see more than you hear," he said finally. "That is a valuable thing. You will stay here until this business with the Calibri family is settled. You saved my life. That creates a debt. In my world, debts are paid with loyalty or blood." For 3 days, Anna lived in the gilded cage. She was treated with courteous indifference by the staff and watched constantly by the guards. She saw Don Massimo only once, walking the gardens with Silvio, their heads closed together in conversation. Silvio never looked at her. On the fourth night, the quiet shattered. Anna was reading in her room when the explosion rocked the east wing. The taste of dust and cordite filled the air. Screams and gunfire erupted from the courtyard. The guard outside her door burst in, her weapon drawn. "Stay down, do not leave this room." But Anna's instincts screamed. This wasn't a random attack. This was a strike at the heart of the Romano power, and she was in the heart. She crawled to the window. Below, men in black tactical gear were swarming the grounds, firing with precision. They weren't wild street soldiers, they were professionals. And leading them, directing the assault with cold calm from the cover of a fountain, was Silvio. The truth crashed over her. Marco was a pawn, a patsy. The real traitor was the man Massimo trusted most. The attack wasn't just to kill the Don, it was a coup. Silvio was cleaning house. Her door flew open. Not the female guard, but a young soldier bleeding from his arm, his face frantic. The Don wants you now." He didn't wait for an answer, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the smoke-filled hallway. They ran through a nightmare of noise and confusion. The soldier led her to a reinforced panic room hidden behind a bookcase in the study. Don Massimo was inside, a gun in his hand, a cut bleeding above his eye. With him were only 2 other men. He saw Anna and his shoulders sagged slightly in relief. "They're inside the house. Silvio's men. He has been planning this for a long time." Anna grabbed the notepad. "He is outside, leading them." Massimo's face hardened into a mask of pure, unforgiving fury. The betrayal was complete. "Then he will die tonight." He turned to his men. "The tunnel. We get to the garage, we get to the cars, we regroup." But as they moved to a hidden door in the panic room floor, a new sound cut through the chaos. The distant, piercing wail of police sirens, dozens of them converging on the estate. One of the soldiers paled. "Boss, the police, they never come here, not unless." "Unless they're called," Massimo finished, his voice a growl. He looked at Anna, a horrifying realization dawning. "Silvio isn't just taking my family. He's giving me to the law. He's clearing the board in one night." The tunnel was their only hope. But as the heavy door swung open, revealing a dark concrete staircase, a new problem presented itself. The young soldier who had fetched Anna clutched his bleeding arm, his face pale. "The code for the garage gate, Silvio changed it this afternoon. I heard him. We're locked in. They were trapped in a sinking ship, with the traitor at the helm and the cavalry, the wrong cavalry, racing to the scene. Don Massimo Romano, the most powerful man in the city, looked at the mute waitress who had seen the poison and now saw the full extent of the conspiracy. His empire was falling in a single night, and the only witness to how it started was standing right beside him, with no way out. But Anna was already writing, her pencil flying across the notepad, pulling a memory from the depths of her silent observation. The code, I saw it, this afternoon. Silvio in the garden, he typed it into his phone, 4 digits, 9731. Don Massimo stared at the numbers, then at her face. You are sure? She nodded once, sharp and definitive. In her world, memory was everything. Words vanished, but images stayed. One of the soldiers, a grizzled man named Carlo, didn't wait for an order. He vanished down the concrete stairs into the tunnel's darkness. 30 seconds later, a faint, metallic clunk echoed up to them, followed by a low hum. The gate was open. Move, Massimo commanded. They descended into the cold, damp passage, a utility tunnel that ran a quarter-mile beneath the grounds to a detached garage hidden in a wooded ravine. The sound of the battle above grew muffled, replaced by the drip of water and their own ragged breathing. Anna's mind raced. Silvio had planned for everything: the attack, the police, the changed code. But he hadn't planned for her. They emerged into a stark concrete garage holding 3 vehicles, a nondescript van and 2 armored sedans. Carlo went straight to a wall panel and punched in the code Anna had provided. The main garage door began to roll up with a quiet electric whir, revealing the dark tree line. That's when the headlights hit them. Not police lights, but the bright white beams of 2 black SUVs parked 50 yards away, blocking the single gravel access road. Figures stood silhouetted against the glare, weapons raised. "Boss," Carlo yelled, diving for cover as the first shots rang out, pinging off the garage door frame. Silvio had left a backup team. The tunnel wasn't an escape route. It was a funnel. Trapped again, Massimo shoved Anna behind the bulk of one sedan. Into the van. It's the only one with reinforced sides. They scrambled, bullets chewing into concrete around them. Carlo returned fire from the doorway, providing cover. As Anna hauled herself into the van's back compartment, she saw him stagger, hit in the leg. Don Massimo grabbed the wounded soldier and dragged him inside, then slammed the door shut. The driver, the other guard, was already in the front, firing the engine. "Go, ram through them," Massimo roared. The van lurched forward with a diesel growl, accelerating straight for the SUVs. The men outside scattered. The impact was a sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass as the van's reinforced plow punched through the lighter vehicle, blocking its path. They were through, bouncing wildly onto the forest road. But the second SUV was in pursuit, its engine screaming. Gunfire peppered the van's rear doors. Inside, Carlo groaned, applying pressure to his leg wound. Don Massimo pulled a first aid kit from under a seat, his hand steady. He looked at Anna. "Check the radio. See if you can raise any of my men. Channel 4. Anna crawled to the front, gesturing to the panicked driver to lower the divider window. She took the handset, her knowledge of electronics from her lab job coming back. She switched to Channel 4, pressed transmit, and held it out to Massimo. He grabbed it. "This is Romano. I am off the estate pursued. Who is clear? Respond." Static hissed for a terrifying moment. Then a broken voice came through. "Boss, it's Tomas. The west gate is gone. They're everywhere. Silvio's men and the cops, they're working together. I saw them talking." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Silvio wasn't just making a power grab. He had brokered a deal. He would deliver Don Massimo Romano to the authorities, dismantle the old regime, and in exchange, he would get a clean slate, a legal business front, and control of whatever remained. He was trading a crown for a legitimate suit. "Where are you, Tomas?" Massimo asked, his voice hollow. Making for the old Rossi warehouse. Maybe 10 of us left. Go to ground. Do not engage. Wait for my call. Massimo dropped the handset. He looked defeated, the empire he built over 30 years evaporating in a single hour. The van swerved onto a paved road, the pursuing SUV still clinging to their tail. Anna tapped his arm. She pointed at the road ahead, then made a sharp cutting motion with her hand. She mimed driving, then an explosion. She was thinking of the lab again, of chemical spills and safety protocols. She grabbed the notepad. They will set up a roadblock. They know these roads. We cannot outrun them to the city. What is your suggestion? Massimo asked, a flicker of his old authority returning. Let them catch us, but on our terms. We need a place with 2 exits, and we need a distraction. The Don studied her, then nodded slowly. He leaned forward and spoke to the driver. Take the next left, head for the riverfront industrial park, the old bottling plant. You know it. The driver, white-knuckled, nodded. Yes, boss. 5 minutes later, the van screeched into the vast, derelict lot of a shuttered factory, its broken windows like blind eyes. The pursuing SUV skidded in after them. Get to the central loading bay, Massimo instructed. Then you and Carlo get out the east fire exit. Take Anna. Go to the Rossi warehouse. I will lead them the other way. Anna grabbed his arm, shaking her head violently. She wrote quickly. No, they want you alive for the arrest. A dead boss is no deal for Silvio. They will not shoot you, but they will shoot us. We stay together, we use that. She pointed to the factory's towering roof, then to the van. A dangerous, desperate plan formed in her gestures. Massimo understood. A gamble, but the only one left. The van slid into the shadowy loading bay, a cavernous space littered with rusted machinery. They piled out. Carlo limped badly but could move. Anna pointed to a catwalk high above, then to the driver, handing him the notepad where she'd scribbled instructions. He read it, eyes wide, then nodded. The sound of the SUV crunching over debris outside echoed through the building. Doors slammed. Orders were barked. Silvio's hit squad was moving in. Anna, Massimo, and Carlo moved silently into a maze of old conveyor belts. The driver hid by the van. They heard the footsteps enter the bay, cautious, sweeping flashlights cutting through the gloom. Romano, a voice called out. It was one of Silvio's captains, a man named Gio. It's over, the police have the estate. Come out and you get handed over clean. Resist and you die here, the girl too. Massimo remained silent. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. She watched the driver from the shadows. He counted on his fingers 3, 2, 1. He struck a flare he'd found in the van's emergency kit and tossed it onto the driver's seat, where he'd spilled a trail of gasoline from the tank. The effect was instant. A whoosh of flame erupted inside the van, lighting up the entire bay. The hit squad, momentarily startled, focused their lights and weapons on the blazing vehicle. That was the distraction. From the high catwalk, Carlo, using his good leg and one arm, pushed a massive, rusted gear assembly over the railing. It crashed down with an ear-splitting roar right behind the hit squad, scattering them. Now, Massimo whispered. While the men were disoriented by the noise and the fire, Anna, Massimo, and Carlo slipped out a rusted side door they had pried open earlier, into the cool night air and the maze of other decaying buildings. They could hear shouts of confusion behind them. They ran, Carlo gritting his teeth against the pane, until they found a stolen delivery truck with keys foolishly left inside. Massimo hot-wired it in seconds, and they lurched onto the deserted back roads, heading for the supposed safety of the Rossi warehouse. For the first time in hours, there was silence, broken only by the truck's worn engine. They had escaped the immediate trap, but Anna knew the truth. They were now fugitives from both the mob and the law. Silvio owned the city, and he would turn every stone to find them. They reached the warehouse as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. It was a bleak, windowless structure by the docks. Tomas and 7 other battered, shell-shocked men were inside. It was all that remained of the Romano family. As Carlo's wound was properly treated, Massimo gathered the survivors. The defiance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, simmering calculation. "Silvio has made a deal with the devil," he said, his voice low. "He has given our organization to the police. That means he has given them names, accounts, routes. Everyone in this room is a wanted man. There is no going back to what was." He turned to Anna, who stood apart, hugging herself against the morning chill. "You have a choice now. We can get you out of the city. Money, a new identity far away from this. You have more than earned it." Anna looked around at the desperate faces of the last loyal soldiers. She thought of Silvio's calm betrayal, of the police who were now his allies, of a city that would be worse under his rule disguised as order. She picked up a piece of charcoal from the floor and walked to a clean patch of wall. She didn't write about escape. She drew a simple diagram, a flowchart. At the top, Silvio. Lines connecting down to a police badge, to a dollar sign, to a gavel. Then she drew a line through all of it. She pointed at the diagram, then at her own eyes, and finally at Don Massimo. Her meaning was clear. She wasn't leaving. She saw the whole structure of the conspiracy, and she would help him tear it down. A grim smile touched Massimo's lips for the first time since the restaurant. "Then we fight a war on 2 fronts," he said, "against the traitor within and the law that protects him." He looked at his few remaining men. "We are ghosts now, and we will remind Silvio why he feared the dark." But as they began to plan, a new sound echoed through the docklands, the familiar, relentless wail of police sirens, converging not on the estate this time, but on the industrial district, on their location. Someone had talked, or they had been tracked. Their first refuge had lasted less than an hour. The war had found them already. The sirens weren't just approaching. They were forming a net. Red and blue lights flashed against the warehouse's high, grimy windows, painting the panicked faces of the men inside. "They're surrounding the block," Tomas yelled from a peephole by the loading door. Don Massimo's face was granite. This was it. The final box. Silvio had outmaneuvered him completely, using the state's machinery to finish the job. To die in a shootout with police was to die a common criminal, to validate every lie Silvio had sold them. But Anna was moving. She wasn't looking at the doors or the windows. She was looking at the floor, at the thick layer of dust and grime. She dropped to her knees, sweeping her hand through it, revealing faint, painted markings beneath, old warehouse layout indicators. She traced a line to the far wall, which was stacked with moldering pallets. She grabbed Carlo's arm and pointed insistently. "What is it, girl?" Carlo grunted, limping after her. She shoved at a pallet. It was light fake. Behind it was not a wall, but a heavy, rusted metal door, almost invisible in the gloom. A maintenance hatch. The driver rushed over to help. Together, they strained against it until it shrieked open on stiff hinges, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. "A dock access," Massimo breathed, hope flaring for the first time. "To the old sewer lines that feed into the river. They were sealed decades ago." Anna nodded vigorously, pointing down, then making a swimming motion. It was a gamble, a flooded, dangerous maze, but it was the only exit the police wouldn't have covered. "Go, all of you," Massimo ordered his men. "Stay together. Get to the river, split up, disappear. If you make it out, wait for a signal, the old way, the church bells." The men didn't need telling twice. They vanished into the hole, Carlo last, giving Anna a grateful nod. Massimo turned to follow, but Anna grabbed his sleeve. She shook her head and pointed at him, then at the main warehouse floor. She mimed talking on a phone, then pointed at the flashing lights outside. She wasn't suggesting they run. She was suggesting they stay. He understood instantly. If everyone fled, the police would hunt them all. But if the prize remained, the hunt would stop here. and a stationary target could be made to talk. "You have a plan," he stated. She nodded, a fierce light in her eyes. She pointed to the open maintenance hatch, then to herself, and made a slashing motion across her own throat. She would be the one who stayed, the bait, the witness. "No," Massimo said, the word final. "I brought you into this. I won't sacrifice you to them." But Anna was already writing, her movements urgent. "They want you, not me. I am a victim. A hostage you took from the restaurant. I can talk to them. I can tell them about Silvio." "You cannot talk to anyone," Massimo said, the old frustration at her silence surfacing. She tapped her head, then her eyes. "I can show them." She pointed to his phone. "You have evidence. The recording of Silvio and the police captain you told me about. Give it to me. I will get it to them." During the van ride, Massimo had confided in her. For months, suspecting a leak but not dreaming it was Silvio, he had secretly recorded a meeting between his consigliere and a high-ranking police captain. It was vague, but it proved a relationship. He carried the file on an encrypted flash drive in his pocket, a final insurance policy he'd thought useless against tonight's blunt force. He hesitated, the lifelong instinct to trust no one warring with the certain knowledge that this woman had saved him twice with nothing to gain. The bullhorn crackled outside. "Romano, this is the police. Come out with your hands up. You have 1 minute." Anna held out her hand, her gaze unblinking. With a slow, deliberate motion, Don Massimo Romano reached into his pocket and placed the small silver drive into her palm. He closed her fingers around it. "His name is Captain Valerie. The file is labeled Eclipse." Anna squeezed his hand, then pushed him firmly toward the open hatch. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the mute waitress standing alone in the vast, empty warehouse, surrounded by the lights of his enemies. "What is your full name?" he asked, the question strangely formal. She smiled a little, then wrote one last time on her dusty notepad, "Anna Giove." "I will find you, Anna Giove," he promised. Then he descended into the darkness, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. Anna was alone. She took a deep, shuddering breath, walked to the center of the space, and sat down cross-legged on the cold concrete. She placed the flash drive carefully beside her. Then she waited. The main door exploded inwards with a battering ram. Tactical officers swarmed in, lasers painting her chest. On the ground, now. She didn't move. She just looked at them, her hands open and visible on her knees. An officer approached cautiously, his weapon trained on her. "Where is Romano?" Anna pointed to the closed maintenance hatch, then made a running motion with her fingers, pointing away. She shook her head and pointed at herself, then mimed being cuffed. "He's gone. I stayed." They searched the place frantically, finding the hatch, confirming the escape route. She was hauled to her feet, handcuffed, and led out into the blinding chaos of the police perimeter. She was put in the back of a patrol car, not as a perpetrator but as a witness, or a suspect. For 12 hours she sat in a sterile interrogation room. They brought in a sketchpad, thinking it would help. She drew what they asked for: Marco's face, Silvio's face, the layout of Il Destino. But when a smug, gray-haired man in an expensive suit entered the room, Captain Valerie, she realized. She knew the real test had come. "Miss Giove," he said, sitting across from her, his tone dripping with false concern. "A terrible ordeal. That animal Romano took you hostage after you witnessed his nephew's murder, is that right? Forced you to flee with him. He was writing Silvio's narrative for her, the narrative that made her a pawn and Romano a monster." Anna looked at the sketchpad. She slowly drew a new picture, a wine glass, an oily sheen on the rim. Then she drew a chain linking 3 figures, Silvio, Captain Valerie, and a bag of money. She slid it across the table. Valerie's face tightened. "I don't know what you're implying. You're confused, traumatized." He reached to take the drawing, but Anna slapped her hand over it. She looked him dead in the eye, then slowly, deliberately, pulled the silver flash drive from her sleeve where she'd hidden it during the pat-down. She placed it on the drawing, right over the bag of money. The captain's composure shattered. He lunged for it, but Anna was faster, snatching it back and holding it tight in her cuffed hands. She pointed at the mirrored glass of the interrogation room, knowing others were watching, then pointed at the drive and made a copying motion. The message was clear. This is the evidence, and if anything happens to me or it, copies exist. It was a bluff, but it was a bluff backed by the terrified guilt in Captain Valerie's eyes. He stood up abruptly and left the room. 20 minutes later, a different officer entered, a younger woman with a tired face. "I'm Detective Ruiz. I'll be taking over your case. Would you like to make a formal statement?" The tide had turned. Silvio's control over the narrative was not absolute. Anna had found the crack. She spent the next week in protective custody, working with Ruiz and a dedicated prosecutor. Using the Eclipse file as a key, they began untangling Silvio's web. The case was explosive. A high-level police corruption scandal intertwined with a mafia coup. The media pounced. Silvio, who had been preparing for a press conference to announce a new community partnership, found himself raided by federal agents. Don Massimo Romano remained a ghost, but from the shadows, his remaining influence worked. Key witnesses, documents, and financial records mysteriously found their way to the prosecutor's office, each piece meticulously dismantling Silvio's legitimacy and his deal with the authorities. 3 months after the night at Il Destino, Anna stood on the steps of the courthouse, sunlight warm on her face. She was no longer a witness. She was a free woman. The charges against her had been dropped, her actions ruled as coercion and later heroic cooperation. Silvio and Captain Valerie were in jail, awaiting trial on a mountain of charges. Marco's body had been found in the river, a victim of the war he started. Detective Ruiz handed Anna a sealed envelope. He said you'd know what it meant. Inside was a single key and an address. Not an order, not a demand, an offer. The address led to a small, quiet bookstore in a leafy neighborhood far from the city's core. The apartment above it was sunny, clean, and safe. On the kitchen table was a legal document, establishing her as the store's new manager and part owner. There was no name on the deed, just a holding company. But nestled beside the papers was an old, leather-bound journal. She opened it. The first page held a photograph of a young Don Massimo Romano, standing with a woman who had Anna's eyes and smile. Her mother, a note was paperclipped to it. "I did not save you, Anna, you saved me. I have spent a lifetime looking for enemies in loud voices. I found my only ally in the silence. The debt is paid, but my gratitude is not. The city is quieter now. I think you will like it better this way. M." Anna ran her fingers over her mother's face in the photo, a connection to a past she'd never known. He hadn't just given her a future. He'd given her back a piece of her history. On a shelf in the apartment's living room, a vintage bell sat beside a notepad. A note underneath it read, "For when you have something to say." One evening, months later, Anna was arranging a display in the bookstore window when the bells on the door chimed. An older man in a simple overcoat entered, his face worn but calm. He browsed the history section, selected a book on Renaissance art and brought it to the counter. Don Massimo Romano placed cash on the counter. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She nodded back, a small, peaceful smile on her lips. He took his book and left, melting back into the city's anonymous flow. Anna Giove, the mute waitress who saw the poison, looked out at the quiet street. She picked up the vintage bell from her shelf and rang it once. The clear, sweet sound filled the shop, a simple, beautiful noise in her world of perfect silence. She was home. So what became of the mute waitress and the Mafia king? Their story is a testament to a power that exists outside of noise, outside of threats and shouted orders. In a world built on loud displays of force, the quietest person in the room saw the truth that would have destroyed them all. Don Massimo Romano never reclaimed his old throne. The empire built on fear was dismantled, first by betrayal, then by the law. But the man who emerged from the shadows was perhaps more formidable. He operates in the spaces between, a whisper in the city's ear, his influence measured not in territory, but in unshakable loyalty and carefully placed favors. He learned from a woman who could not speak that the most powerful messages are often the ones never uttered aloud. Anna Giove found more than safety. She found a purpose that used her greatest perceived weakness as her strength. The bookstore thrives. She has begun teaching a literacy class for deaf children, using the same patience and observation that once watched a killer's hands. She is not a victim of her past, but an architect of a future she chose. Silvio and Captain Valerie will spend decades in prison, their grand bargain exposed as the hollow, greedy pact it was. Marco's body was a casualty of the war he helped ignite, a warning that in the quest for a crown, you often become a sacrifice for the next man's ambition. The story of the napkin that started a war leaves us with a lingering question. In our own lives, surrounded by noise and distraction, what truths are we missing because we're not trained to watch in silence? What subtle poison is being poured right in front of us, disguised as tradition, or loyalty, or simple routine? Anna's story reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves with a shout. They arrive on the tip of a finger, in the shimmer of a glass, in the quiet decision of one person who refuses to look away. If you found yourself in that restaurant, would you have seen what Anna saw? Or would the noise of the world have drowned out the silent truth? Let us know what you think in the comments below. For more stories of ordinary people thrust into impossible choices, of secrets hidden in plain sight, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You never know what you might see when you learn to listen with your eyes. Until next time,